Welcome back, scholars, to our Digital Academy. I am Professor Spark. Whether we are turning the pages of a timeless novel, our mission remains the same. Will today's sweep us into the concert hall? Let's find out together.
Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most haunting, just absolutely gothic mysteries in all of classical music history, Franz Schubert's Symphony No. 8 in B minor. It's a piece of music that literally defies logic. I mean, it stands as this towering, monumental achievement, despite literally missing its entire second half.
And that brings us to this massive central paradox. How in the world can an unfinished work be considered a flawless masterpiece? Seriously, how exactly did two abandoned musical movements become one of the most iconic, frequently performed staples in classical history? How does something broken become flawless? Well, to figure that out, we got to look at the evidence.
All right, part 1, a masterpiece left behind, the paradox of Symphony No. 8.
Let's lay out the basic facts of the case, because the timeline is just bizarre. The year was 1822. Franz Schubert was just 25 years old, and he writes these two full, breathtakingly beautiful movements for a symphony. He then starts sketching out a third movement, a scherzo, and then he just stops. He drops the work completely. But crazily enough, he didn't die immediately after. He actually lived for another 6 years, passing away in 1828. He had plenty of time to finish the thing, but he actively chose not to. Or, maybe he simply couldn't bring himself to do it. And then, the music just vanished. Poof! It wasn't until 1865 that this symphony was finally discovered and premiered to the world.
So that leaves us with this staggering 37-year gap. 37 years! For nearly 4 decades after Schubert's death, this masterpiece just sat in total darkness. It was hidden away in a drawer among the private papers of his friends, the Hüttenbrenner brothers. But world had absolutely no clue this groundbreaking music even existed. When it finally saw the light of day, audiences were just floored. But the big question remains, why on earth did he abandon it in the first place?
Which leads us to part 2, A Composer in Crisis, Investigating the Shadows of Mortality. To understand why he stopped, we really have to look at the immense, almost crushing pressures on this young genius back in 1822. First off, you've got the towering, incredibly intimidating legacy of Beethoven. Beethoven was living right there in the same city. It was a symphonic shadow that both deeply inspired and honestly terrified young composers. Second, and this is so tragic, this was the exact time Schubert received a devastating syphilis diagnosis. In the 19th century, that was a fatal health crisis. It brought on immediate, terrifying thoughts of mortality and just deep existential dread. And finally, society itself was totally fracturing. There was this massive cultural shift happening, moving away from the strict order of the Enlightenment straight into the volatile, messy emotion of Romanticism.
So Schubert was essentially trapped right between two musical worlds. You had the classical era, which was all about strict rules and formal restraint, think Haydn and Mozart. But then this emerging Romantic era was entirely about emotional depth, lyrical freedom, and really embracing personal turmoil. And Schubert, he became the bridge between them. He basically took his own very real fear of death, shoved it into a strict classical structure, and then just ripped it open with raw romantic emotion.
Let's get into the music itself. Part 3, Movement 1, Inner Turmoil, The Heart of Darkness.
The very first movement he wrote, the Allegro Moderato in B minor, is absolutely not some polite, stuffy piece of classical music. It is a deeply psychological landscape of anxiety, yearning, and fear. To really get it, you need to understand this term ombra. It's a musical shadow effect that composers use to evoke unease, foreboding, and ghostly presences. Schubert actually opens the entire symphony with an ombra theme. Deep down in the cellos and basses, you hear this low, brooding, rhythmically ambiguous melody. It doesn't sound like a hero marching in. It literally sounds like a recurring nightmare stalking you in the dark.
In fact, psychoanalytic readings of this first movement have described the music as a virtual protagonist haunted by ghostly presences. The anxiety just builds and builds into these massive, terrifying trombone climaxes that feel intensely fateful and violent. And what's really striking here is that at the end of the movement, Schubert doesn't give us some triumphant, happy victory. Instead, the movement just collapses back to B minor. It ends in this quiet, bleak resignation. The battle is lost.
And then we get a massive shift. Part 4, Movement 2, Bittersweet Consolation, Peace After the Storm.
So right after the absolute trauma of that first movement, we step into a starkly different, almost ethereal world for the second movement, the Andante con moto. The landscape changes radically.
We shift completely away from that dark, anxious key of B minor straight into the warm, glowing key of E major. The whole emotion flips from anxiety and violence to this deep nostalgia and peace. It's like the fierce inner turmoil of the first half is being directly answered by the tender, bittersweet acceptance of the second. This second movement gives us these tender, singing horn and string themes that just ache with nostalgia. We hear this floating, ethereal clarinet and oboe cantilena. Basically, that's a really smooth, lyrical, almost vocal style of playing, just done on instruments. There are these moments of absolute pin-drop stillness, which get interrupted by majestic brass and timpani, but it all leads to an extended elegiac coda, an elegy, a musical farewell. This movement offers hope. It offers this profound sense of quiet acceptance. So emotionally, even if not structurally, it provides an overwhelming sense of finality.
Let's bring it all together. Part 5, the power of fragments, the problem of closure.
So, why does being unfinished actually elevate this symphony? Why isn't it just dismissed as a frustrating mistake? Honestly, it comes down to the sublime power of the fragmentary. See, the Romantic era was obsessed with ruins. Think about all those paintings of crumbling Gothic abbeys or poetry written about forgotten, half-destroyed statues. To the Romantics, human life itself is incomplete. Things are left undone. We are all essentially fragments. So a symphony that possesses these deep, dark, Gothic qualities and deliberately lacks a neat, tidy resolution, that perfectly embodies the ultimate Romantic truth. It is unfinished, yet it is totally complete in its emotional impact.
This problem of closure dramatically changes how you and I experience the music today. Because it's unfinished, it actually requires you to do the work. First, you have to confront the abrupt end of the music. It just stops after the second movement. Second, you actively engage with that lack of closure. And finally, you have to complete the emotional journey in your own mind. Really highly acclaimed modern performances like Ivan Fischer conducting the Budapest Festival Orchestra back in 2014, they lean into this beautifully. They make you feel the heavy silence after that final note. They turn you from a passive listener into an active participant in Schubert's own grief and ultimately his acceptance.
Ultimately, the problem of closure is a feature. It's definitely not a bug. Schubert didn't need to write a triumphant third or fourth movement because, well, the story was already told. The symphony's structural ingenuity and its raw emotional authenticity capture the painful struggle and the profound beauty of the human condition. And it does it in a way that a perfectly finished, polite classical piece just simply never could.
I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If an abandoned fragment, a piece of music written by a terrified 25-year-old and left hidden in a drawer for 37 years, can so perfectly capture the human condition, what else in our own lives is beautiful precisely because it is incomplete? Think about that the next time you feel the pressure to have absolutely everything perfectly resolved. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep exploring, and I'll catch you next time.